Every year, thousands of young people die not from cancer or vehicle accidents, but by their own hand. In fact, it's the third leading cause of death among the teens and 20s age group, and the second leading cause among college students. Suicide is not a subject we like to think or talk about, but it's our topic on this episode of Living with Loss. Statistics Canada will tell us that there is a reported suicide every 3 hours. What is even more alarming is that it has been estimated that for every successful suicide, there are 15 attempts. In the United States, the stats are even more alarming, with over 32,000 reported suicides. But some people think the actual numbers may be twice that amount. That comes down to 100 people a day in North America, or one suicide every 15 minutes. But it's estimated that a suicide attempt is made about once a minute. So why do so many people see this as the only solution to their situation? There may be several suggestions. The first might be impulsive suicidal behavior. There are those who attempt suicide in an intense emotional moment. Their suicidal idealization may be temporary and transient, but the results, of course, can be tragic. The second reason might be that life is no longer worth living. They may have a feeling of existential despair, and suicide seems to be the logical way to end it all. The third scenario might be a serious or painful illness. Death seems to be a way of escape from a long, expensive, and burdensome process. And of course, here the moral issues are more difficult. Fourthly, it may be a cry for help. The person doesn't mean to kill themselves. The suicide attempt is really a way of asking for help. But of course, it can have devastating effects. Suicide is often seen as a means of coping with overwhelming moments. Yet it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and one that can have devastating effects on those who are left to cope with the issues that such a death raises. Today on Living with Loss, we talk with two parents who experienced the tragic loss of their daughter. Stay tuned for their story on Living with Loss. David and Evelyn Stiller are my guests on Living with Loss. David and Evelyn, welcome. And tell us a little bit about the summer of 1987.
Summer of 1987 was one of the most wonderful times in our life. I can remember driving down the 401 just almost weeping with the tremendous joy that we had in our lifestyle and our living and our family. Our oldest son and his wife were expecting their first on October 20. Our second son had just returned from Africa, and our daughter was lifeguard at a camp. Beautiful 18-year-old girl. And it came crashing down on Thanksgiving weekend when Jilly took her life and forever changed our lives.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Jill. What was she like as a person?
She was very beautiful to us. She was very beautiful, very outgoing. She had many friends, more friends than she needed, but she didn't think she had a lot of friends. But very sparkly and a joy for us to have in our home.
So tell us about that tragic happening.
She had admitted to being bulimic 2 or 3 weeks before she died. Had told Evelyn, and an appointment had been made with the doctor, and she was During the week before she died, she'd made the comment, kind of laughingly, "Daddy, I'm not sure I can make it." And we said, "Well, we can change the appointment quickly." And she laughed it off and said, "No, it's just fine." Evelyn and I went away for that weekend. It was our 29th wedding anniversary. Went up in the Kawarthas, see the beautiful fall colors. Were unable to reach Jill Saturday evening and Sunday morning for the answering machine. As we were driving Sunday morning, the cellular phone rang, and it was my son, and clearly in distress, and said something about we needed to come home, and then the call was interrupted. It went dead. So we turned and started driving toward Peterborough, closer toward the cellular phone, and about an hour later, my brother called, the physician in in London, and said, "You know she's gone." And "Who's gone?" He said, "Well, Jilly's gone." And that was how we received the news.
And what had happened?
She had stayed in the car in the garage with the car running and died from carbon monoxide poisoning. She had been out the evening before with some friends. In fact, she had been shopping for a wedding gift for us.
Anniversary gift for us.
Anniversary gift. For a beautiful cut glass bowl and for an anniversary card. She didn't sign it. She didn't wrap the gift, which was totally out of character for her. And something during that night triggered. She must have gotten depressed about something and decided to end it.
So it sounds like it was almost an impulsive act on her part.
Yes, it was. She was not one who would show depression. She was very even-tempered, wonderfully happy girl. She had been off a bit. In retrospect, as we look back, the few weeks before that, she had been a little bit down. And so somewhere in that impulsive moment, she decided to end it.
So the end of her life took you completely by surprise.
Yes, it certainly did. It was quite a very devastating moment, and you hope you'll never have to relive anything like that again.
You remember when that telephone call came in and David's brother not realizing that you didn't know, and just in such a almost a shocking way, although done with the best of intentions. Do you remember how you felt? Do you remember your reaction when you got the news?
I don't know exactly what I said, but I know it was just, kind of a prayer to God. What's going on? Or you just anguish. I guess that's how you.
She cried out, "My baby, my baby," was Evelyn's response. It was, on my part, total disbelief, because it was not in character with this happy, energetic gal. Just was not in character.
And the fact that this had happened almost by her choice rather than by chance through some illness or something must have been particularly difficult.
There's two elements to it. There's the one of losing a child, and the child dies. Something you're just not equipped to, not prepared to deal with. You know you're going to bury a parent. Chances are you'll bury a mate, but to bury a child doesn't happen. And so that the loss was the crushing beginning. And then as one would deal with the whys, you really were forced to come face to face with the issue. Why did she die? Well, she took her life. And the suicide then becomes just the other dimension to the tragedy.
So you come home and you immediately have to arrange a funeral, and I know you have a wide circle of friends and family, and the church people are very supportive. What did you find helpful over that time of the funeral and the weeks and months that followed Jill's death?
Well, first of all, our family was very supportive, our relatives and our friends. We had, you don't realize how many friends you have at a time like that. And our church was very supportive. We'd only started attending a couple of years before that, and they rallied around us. The pastor, who had lost a son himself several years before, had us out to a retreat center and said, just come out and I'll talk with you, I'll be there for you. They brought us meals for many weeks. I finally had to say, we don't need any more food. It was so good to have that support and that caring. There were some people perhaps didn't understand some of the things that went on, but on the whole, I just am so thankful for our friends. And during the first few days, we knew that there was much prayer going up for us, because we felt, you could feel that kind of a closeness, and that people were holding you up. The first few days, maybe even weeks after Jill died, and we were so glad that we had that support.
I suppose death is always difficult, and when it's a suicide, it's doubly difficult. People don't know what to say, and they don't know how to react. Were there things that you found that maybe weren't so helpful, or did people's attitudes towards you change in some way?
Well, people clearly felt awkward in coming and talking to us. For some time after, they didn't want to mention Jill's name because we might weep. And the fact is that the most precious thing in our life was Jill, and she wasn't there, and of course we wanted to talk about her. So to mention her name, to remember her, was important to us. Many people didn't know what to say, so they would avoid us. And I would say to those people, just be present. In fact, I can't remember what people said, so that isn't the highlight.
So somebody out there watching us,
yes,
and saying, well, I know a situation, but I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. What would you want to say to them that would have been helpful to you?
Just come and talk to us. Talk, I guess, is the problem, but come and be with us and say, I'm feeling for you, or my heart reaches out to you, but just don't avoid us. Just don't avoid us. The other issue is, I think, one of the comments, interesting, that would irritate me more than anything was somebody saying, time will heal. And that to me meant that over time I would forget, and I did not want to forget Jill. So please don't say to me, time will heal. I think as we moved through the grieving, we learned that living heals, that life heals, and that you move into life to the extent that you can, and it's weak and it's faltering, but you don't retreat. And grief was with us a long time. I mean, we struggled for a long time. In fact, it was our 10th anniversary after Jill's death. Before we woke up on that morning of our anniversary, and the first thing on our mind was our own wedding anniversary, not the anniversary of Jill's death, 10 years.
So what did grief look like for you? We're talking about a grief process.
Yeah.
What were some of the emotions, some of the components of grief? How did it manifest itself in your experience?
Well, the grief spasm itself, and I don't know, people who've experienced grief, that may mean something. It's where a song or where a thought triggers that emotional response, and you start to feel that emotion welling within you, and it would seem to have to run its course, and it would leave you exhausted, and it would leave you feeling lonely. And it was those.
Did those happen regularly? Were there specific times that grief spasms, grief attacks, whatever we want to call them, occurred?
I think they varied, especially for both of us. Sometimes I didn't want to talk, or he didn't, I didn't want to hear it. I think it was easier to relate to someone else during some of those times for Dave and I, because he would feel it differently than I would, and maybe he'd weep and I didn't want to weep. And so we shared a little differently in our grief that way.
So I'm hearing something significant here, because so often we hear, and to some extent it's a bit of a myth, you know, that the loss of a child affects a marriage. I'm sure it changed the dynamics of a marriage, but not necessarily as negatively as some people seem to feel. But I'm hearing you saying that sometimes you didn't want to be each other's grief counselors. You wanted to be there for each other, and you needed to talk to different people.
Exactly.
Am I hearing you rightly?
Yes, yes.
We had a friend, good friend, who was a psychiatrist. And we called him up. We had read some of the stats in terms of the difficulties that couples can get into, marriages can get into in the death of a child. And so we called up our friend, and we visited him every week pretty much for 6 months. And he was invaluable to us in terms of being able to talk about our grief and about the issues in front of each other. So that, and he kept reminding us that no one knew how bad I was hurting more than Evelyn, and that we needed to be together talking about it. And I found that to be very helpful, very helpful.
So I'm hearing you say that inevitably there's going to be issues. The challenge isn't, are there going to be issues or not there going to be issues?
Right.
There are going to be issues.
Yes.
It's whether you work them through or whether you don't work them through that's really going to make the difference. And how did you find that working itself out in your own relationship?
Well, there was, we did go through a period of time a couple of years later, and I'm moving to that point and then moving back, where our relationship did struggle, frankly. And we really found it quite difficult to define why. She irritated the daylights out of me, and I did to her. And we went through a good period of time when it seemed like we weren't going to get back in sync again. We weren't blaming each other for the death, but I think just the profoundness of the loss and the fact that for 18 years she had been an integral part of our relationship, that a major chunk had been torn out of it. And we somehow had to find our way back to do that.
One of the things that I often hear from parents who have lost a child in such tragic circumstances is that they feel guilty. Did you struggle with guilt?
I believe I did, and maybe that's being a mother. You think of all the things you should have noticed, you should have done, and I could have done. However, that summer, I remember looking back and on that time, and I wrote her a long letter, and she was at camp, and I really felt good about writing that letter because I hadn't said things I wished I had said, but I wrote it in the letter. And so if I think about it now, I think, if I saw Jill now, I know she'd say, "It's okay, Mom, I love you and I forgive you," and I would certainly do the same for her. But at times, even to this day, I'll say, "Oh, I should have done this," you know. So sometimes the should-haves can trip you up if you're not careful.
Yes, right.
Yeah. I didn't experience as much guilt as Evelyn did. I'm not sure guilt leading to anger. I found it to be when we look back over our time together that our relationship was so close. It was an idyllic father-daughter relationship. I mean, every day we told each other we loved each other, and that it was a difficult moment. I went through faith issue, I think, more than the guilt issue. Faith in the sense that if the words of Christ, "If you take my yoke upon you, it's easy, it's light," that this all-powerful God surely should be able to help with this pain, which never seemed to abate. And I began to doubt my faith, saying, surely if the Christ of the Bible and the Father that I understand was real and I had a relationship with Him, He'd do something about this pain, and that never happened. And I began to see God in a different light. If Christ is the physical, and He is the human representation of the Father, and you look at His concern for the broken and the contrite and the poor in spirit, that really was where He was at. That maybe Christ helping with my burden was that He wept with me, that He walked, that He cared, that He shared that burden with me, and I developed a different appreciation and understanding of Christ.
So again, I'm hearing you say that in terms of your faith perspective, that it was identification with the one whom Isaiah describes as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, rather than asking, the questions that C.S. Lewis poses as to why. Yeah. Although I'm sure the why question must have entered your mind as well.
Sure. I didn't see the why in the same context as fair. People would say it just isn't fair. And I could not make any sense out of that question. And it was kind of, why would fate do this to you? So the why wasn't in that context. I guess I'd been working overseas in West Africa and working with some tribes for several years where up to 40% of the kids didn't make it to 5 years of age. And these people understood the crushing burden of losing children one after another. And when I remembered them a few months later, I realized I joined a very special fraternity.
The Fellowship of Sufferings.
Fellowship of Suffering.
That's right, yes.
Exactly.
That's right, yes.
And that we're not alone in it.
Because that's in such contrast with some of the modern theology that we have today, that says that if we have enough faith that God will look after us and bad things won't happen to good people. So that in a sense, this I hear you saying that this strengthened your faith, that life was difficult, but God was good.
Yes, life was good. When all was said and done, life was good.
And God was faithful, or is faithful. Yeah. Even in the difficult times, He's there for you.
There may be some parents who are watching, having gone through a similar experience, or parents who worry about a similar experience. What kind of things would you like to say that might be helpful? What was helpful to you? What encouragement can you bring to them?
Certainly, you have your child today and love them. There's the when Jill died, one of the things that we wanted to see quickly was that some parents who had survived this, because our sense was, we're not going to make it. We're not sure how we'll die, but how do you survive this? And so early we wanted to see parents who'd survived it. And I guess for those who are watching, who've just lost a child, we're here to say, you can make it. You can survive. And turn to each other and find strength there. And certainly,
support group or a church.
Support group.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bring somebody into your life that can help you put this pain in perspective.
Yes. And what would be the biggest lesson you've learned through all this?
Many lessons.
I think and this is maybe part of the healing, but I think we've learned out of our own hurts, we give to others, we go to others who we know have lost a child, either through suicide or death of a child, that we can be there for them. We don't have all the answers, but we just say, we've been there, we'll help you the way we can, we'll talk about it. And that's, seek out someone if you don't know anybody. Can you come and see me? If they'd even say that, come and visit me, we'd be there.
Evelyn made the comment the other day, the greatest moments of healing in this whole tragedy has been when we've been helping others.